All right, guys, it is week 5. It is April 20th, and we are starting our next unit. Today, your Lecture 4 test is due by the time the testing center closes, so hopefully you get that done. We do have a few things that I want to go over in the video just to kind of introduce the unit. First off, I hope you're watching these videos because I usually cover some important material. And so our next due date is going to be the following Monday, April 27th. You need to get your test done in the testing center like always, and then all of your Moodle assignments will be due by midnight. I do hope that you are doing your homeworks before you take the test, though. Kind of important. At this point, you've probably found your groove, and you kind of know how everything works, but I still just want to go over a few things with you. So we're going to start with the things to know for this next unit. So last chapter, last test, we had 4 chapters. You had chapter 6 through 9 with a heavy focus on 6 and 9. And if you notice, we're back to only doing 1 chapter again. And the good news is the 1 chapter is actually going to be divided into 2 parts, so you can kind of cover it in smaller chunks. You have 8 objectives that we're going to be covering for chapter 12, and this is the start of the nervous system. Now, you might be a little bit confused as to why we're jumping to chapter 12, because the last chapter that we finished was chapter 9, and so you would assume that we would be jumping to chapter 10. We've gone in order up to this point, but there is a reason why we're jumping to chapter 12, and it's because chapter 10 and 11 cover the muscular system. And so it goes into very detailed components of muscle contraction. Well, what tells the muscles to contract is the nervous system. And so to better understand muscle contraction, it's really best if we cover nerve impulses first. And so we're going to jump ahead to chapter 12. We're going to cover the nervous system, kind of an overview of the nervous system. Then we will jump back into muscles and do chapter 10. And then we're going to jump forward to finish out the semester and continue on with the nervous system. So I know it seems a little out of whack, but there is a reason that we're doing it that way. So for this next test, you only have 1 chapter, chapter 12, 8 objectives. And the way the notes are divided up is you have objectives 1 through 4, and then you have objectives 5 through 8. And then you also have your homeworks kind of divided based on certain objectives. And so by this point, you know that whatever these objectives are, this is the material that you will find in your notes and in the videos, and this is also the material that you will be tested over. You have word bits as always, so I hope you guys are learning those. Those can be really important to help you understand words and just general test-taking strategy. And then I do want to draw your attention to the possible essay questions. So notice that I have number 3 highlighted. That is because that will be the essay. Okay, I know it says 3 possible here, but I can tell you right now, number 1, you really can't do on Moodle. Do you need to know the graph of an action potential? Absolutely. You definitely need to understand this material, but you aren't going to be expected to do an essay over it. The essay for this chapter will be number 3, which is list the events that occur at the synapse. Now, this is going to be your one and only essay, and it's going to be worth 10 points. And it is pretty technical, and so I do want to take a moment and kind of show you where you can find the answer to this particular essay. So when you go to your Moodle and you scroll down to your notes, the essay that you're going to be doing is going to be in chapter 12, part 2. And at the very end of that chapter, I actually have it pulled up, at the very end of that particular lesson, at the very end of the chapter, we talk about synapses. And so what a synapse is, it's the space between the end of the neuron and another cell, okay? And so sometimes we have a neuron meeting up with another neuron, or sometimes we have a neuron meeting up with what we call an effector, like a muscle. And so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be labeling the steps that occur when we get to the synapse. Now, at this point, you should already know that at the axon terminals, which is at the end of the axon terminals are where we convert that electrical nervous impulse into a chemical signal. So what this essay is really asking you is, how does this happen? How do we convert that electrical action potential into a chemical signal? and the chemical signal is essentially going to be a neurotransmitter. So this particular essay can be very technical, and so I just kind of want to take a minute. If you try to memorize long sentences, it's going to be probably very difficult, okay? It's much easier to understand this essay if you kind of break it down into little tiny pieces, step by step, and then you kind of learn it in small fragments, okay? Whenever you write this essay, it doesn't have to be in long sentences. So I just kind of want to break this down for you a little bit and just kind of show you what I expect for this essay. If I had you in person, we would be doing this and I would be repeating this over and over and over again, giving you an opportunity to kind of write it down. But you are going to have the option to listen to this video more than once. So the first thing is it tells you to start kind of when the action potential reaches the axon terminal. So prior to this lesson, you will learn all about action potentials and how they move down the axon. And so this kind of picks up when that action potential gets to the very end. So the very first thing you want to put is the AP reaches the axon terminal. All right, so this right here would be the start of your essay. And if anything, at least put the first thing that it tells you in the essay. It tells you where to start. So you need 10 points, but even if you only get one, that's better than nothing. So at least put where it tells you to start in the essay. So the very first thing that happens is the AP reaches the axon terminal, which means that electrical signal reaches the end of the axon. And so this is where we have the synapse here. So over here in this picture, this space is called the synapse or the synaptic cleft, okay? And so what's going to happen is we're going to have this series of events that's going to help carry that message from neuron number 1, which is called the presynaptic cell, to cell number 2, whether it be a neuron or a muscle. It's called the postsynaptic cell. So the first thing that happens is the action potential reaches the axon terminal. And what that's going to do is that's going to trigger voltage-gated calcium channels to open. So your objective 4 is all about these proteins. And this particular protein channel opens when there's a change in voltage. And so the voltage-gated calcium channels are open. And so one of the things that you will see in previous notes is that calcium is more abundant on the outside. So when that calcium channel opens, calcium is going to go in, okay? And so calcium is just one of our ions. It's going to pass through that protein channel into the cell. Now, when it does that, it's going to kind of associate with these vesicles. So the calcium ions are going to interact with vesicles that are in that axon terminal. So you can see these little circles with dots in them. These are little membrane sacs or vesicles, and inside of those vesicles are a neurotransmitter. And neurotransmitters are just the chemical signal. So the calcium moves in and it interacts with the vesicles. Now what it does is it actually tells those vesicles, you can see this arrow here, it tells these vesicles to kind of move to the membrane and release its contents. So the vesicles are going to fuse with the membrane. All right, so calcium's going to interact with them. It's going to fuse with the membrane, and you can see that it's releasing these little dots. Those dots are our neurotransmitters. So when the vesicles fuse with the membrane, they're going to release the neurotransmitters into the synapse. So that's going to be our next step. So the first thing that happened was the AP reached the axon terminal, calcium channels opened, calcium moved in, interacted with the vesicles fused with the membrane, and then they released the neurotransmitters. So this is kind of the first half of your essay. Once again, remember it in short, little, distinct steps, and it's going to be much easier. Now, once those neurotransmitters are released into the synapse or the synaptic cleft, as we can see here, we see all these little dots here. Those are the neurotransmitters. What they're going to do is they're going to spread out, or they're going to diffuse across. So the neurotransmitters diffuse across the synapse, and they're going to bind to protein receptors on that second cell, or the postsynaptic cell. So the neurotransmitters diffuse and they bind to receptors. Now, another protein that you learned about back in Objective 4 was a ligand-gated ion channel. And all a ligand is a chemical signal. And so essentially, these neurotransmitters are ligands. And so when that neurotransmitter binds to these protein channels over here, that's essentially what opens the channel. That's the key that unlocks the gate. And so the neurotransmitters are going to diffuse across, they're going to bind to the receptors here, and it's going to cause these ligand-gated ion channels to open. So once the neurotransmitters bind, these ligand-gated sodium channels open. Now, we should have learned from previous objectives that sodium is higher on the outside of the cell. And so what that's going to do is it's going to cause sodium to rush in, and that's essentially what causes depolarization. Okay, so the neurotransmitters are going to bind to the protein receptors. They're ligand-gated ion channels. When they open, sodium is going to rush in, and when sodium rushes in, that essentially depolarizes the next cell. And remember that depolarization is pretty much the start of that action potential. We have to have a change in voltage and it flips the charge. So when the sodium diffuses in, that is going to change the membrane potential, or that is going to depolarize the next cell or the postsynaptic cell. And that's essentially where you have to stop. Okay, so for your essay, you have two slides. You have events at the synapse. There's one slide that kind of talks about when the AP reaches the terminal. And then you have the next slide. It's a continuation of events at the synapse. And it's going to end when the second cell is depolarized. So if you break it down into simple steps, so let's go through it one more time. The AP reaches the axon terminal. Calcium channels open. Calcium rushes in, interacts with the vesicles, causes the vesicles to fuse with the membrane and release the neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters are, well, let's see, why is this not going? There we go. The neurotransmitters are going to diffuse across the synapse and bind to receptors. These are ligand-gated ion channels, and so when the neurotransmitter binds, those channels are going to open and sodium is going to rush in. And the rushing in of sodium is what depolarizes the membrane of that second cell. And that is going to be what you need for your essay. So remember, I give partial credit, so if you can't remember all of it, just put what you can remember. But that's going to be 10 points of your test, so I definitely encourage you to prepare for that and study for that in preparation for the test. In terms of homework assignments, you do have a few more than you typically do. There are lots of videos for this unit because the videos can really help you understand these very kind of abstract concepts. It's hard to understand ions flowing and electrical signals and, chemical signals. And so you have several videos that you're going to watch to kind of help you understand the step-by-step process of action potentials, a nerve impulse, what happens at the synapse. And so you have several videos to help you. I think that pretty much is it for lecture test 5. Main thing is your lecture test 5 is due on the 27th. And I can't seem to get this. Here we go. Let's scroll back up here. Having some technical difficulties. There we go. All right, so your test for this unit is due a week from today on Monday the 27th. I hope you guys are doing well. If you need any help, as always, please come see me or feel free to email me. Some of you guys are doing great. Your tests are looking awesome. Some of you guys, I think, may need to be either studying a little more or maybe getting some help, and just know that I'm here to help you if you need it. All right, that's it for the intro to lecture test 5. You guys have a great week, and let me know if you need my help.